Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants Hangout. My name is Joe Grabowski, and I will be your host for today. We're really excited for today's Hangout. Today, we're going to be hanging out with Céline Cousteau. She's the founder and executive director of Cause-Centric Productions, a nonprofit organization creating cause-focused multimedia content. So she's a member of the World Economic Forum Council on Oceans and is fluent in 3 languages. Céline's also the daughter of ocean explorer and filmmaker Jean-Michel Cousteau, and granddaughter of the legendary Jacques-Yves Cousteau. Her current major work is a multimedia project and engagement campaign, Tribes on the Edge, which is based on the indigenous tribes of the Vale do Javari Reserve in the Brazilian Amazon. So Céline, it is so great to be stealing some of your time today. We have lots of excited classrooms, and they're going to be ready for some questions for you when the time comes.
Fantastic. Well, it's good to be here. I love doing these sessions and just getting to see and meet kids from a little bit of everywhere. And all of their questions kind of bring more to my mind in terms of what to think about in sharing the stories. So I'll start a little bit with Tribes on the Edge, since that's kind of my major work now. Tribes on the Edge started at the request of the Indigenous people of the Vale do Javari for me to tell their story to the world. I was there in 2007 on an expedition with my father and my brother, doing a film called Return to the Amazon, which was a 2-hour show for PBS in a series of documentaries called Ocean Adventures. And when I went to the Javari, at first we were just going back to all these areas in the Amazon to document what had happened in the Amazon since the early 1980s. My grandfather was there in the early 1980s. I went to the Amazon at that time as a 9-year-old girl and got to experience the Amazon firsthand. And 25 years later, as an adult, I went back with my family to document what had happened in the past 25 years with the ecosystem, with people, with species. So the Javari Indigenous territory in Brazil was one stop amongst many, but it's the one that impacted me the most. When I was there in 2007, I found out that they have a really high rate of hepatitis, which in a lot of our cultures, we take shots. We have prevention for that kind of illness. But 50 to 80% of these people have some form of hepatitis, A, B, C, and Delta. And it really hit me hard. You know, we watch the news and we read information in books and stuff. But it was really once I was sitting in the middle of this village and heard about these people dying that I realized that firsthand has a greater impact than just watching something on a screen. But not everybody gets to go into the jungle. So I try to bring some of those stories back through documentary film, through different conferences and events, and then through these kinds of sessions. So I left the jungle. We did our job. We were telling the story about what had happened in 25 years in the Amazon. And 3 years later, in 2010, I get an email from somebody from the Amazon, from the Javari Indigenous territory, who says, "We want you to tell our story to the world. We want them to know we exist, and we don't want to die." And that's a really big ask. You know, I think that a lot of people know about species going extinct. You know, we hear about the problem with dolphins or the problem with polar bears. But when somebody is telling you this, it has a much greater impact. So I've spent the past years doing a film. And initially, I thought it was just going to be a documentary film, but it's turned into something much bigger. So what we have done is we've created an impact campaign to go along the film. The impact campaign has 3 initiatives. It's action, communication, and education. So I'll let you guess which part this fits into. On the education initiative, we've been lucky enough to, over the course of about a year and a half, reach over 4,800 students in more than 40 countries with just me sitting behind my computer and telling stories, which really shows that technology can be used for something absolutely amazing. And it can be used to reach out to people around the world without actually having to get on an airplane or travel very far. On the communication side, we're just finishing the film in these next weeks. And we're going to start taking the film to film festivals and different conferences and events. We're going to hit the road this summer in a camper van with my family, and we're going to go to different cities, and we're going to do screenings of the film. We're going to try to go to national parks where everybody's just kind of hanging out, and we want to do open air screenings. Just try to bring a screen outside at nighttime and just have people come and hang out so we can watch the film and have a chat. And the third component is action. So that's where I've learned a lot of lessons from people in the Amazon who said, you want to tell our story, that's nice, but do you really think it's going to change our lives? And I had to ask myself that question, is a film enough? And I don't think it is. I think you have to go beyond making a film or communicating a story. You have to take action. You have to do something about it. So I've decided to work with the tribes, and we have been in numerous conversations. What do they need? How can their lives be positively changed by the work and the things that we can do out here? So they've identified a couple of things. One is they want a community home in the border town so that when they leave the Indigenous territory, they have a place to gather, right? I see all of you guys sitting in a classroom, either on the floor or at your desks, and you have a place to gather, you have a place to learn and go to school. Well, when they leave their Indigenous territory, they want the same thing. They basically want a space to be able to meet together as adults, the young people, so that they can come and do further education and learn more, and also have contact through the internet in sharing information about what's going on. So we're hoping to build a community house for them. And the second component, and this is kind of cool, with the drone technology that is available today, we can not only, take our small drones and do these overflights to be able to take pictures and film like you do for documentaries, but we can also use those drones, and they're a higher level of drone, to basically survey the land. There's a lot of illegal activities happening on their land. They have no way of monitoring it. Drones will allow them to fly over their territory, be able to collect the data, and then come back with the information and be able to more properly protect their land. So some of the threats to their land come from, a lot of them come from illegal activities. So you have hunters and fishermen that want to go in and, basically take animals off of their land. It's illegal. They're not supposed to. You have the logging industry trying to come in and cut down precious wood, right? The hardwoods that a lot of people like buying in foreign countries. It's illegal. They're not supposed to. Gold miners are trying to come in and find gold. All of those products don't stay in Brazil. A lot of those products leave the country and they go to places like North America and Europe. So when we're buying gold or we're buying timber, those are things to think about, that they impact other people elsewhere. And typically if there's illegal activities coming and they find themselves face to face with some of the Indigenous tribes, there's usually a conflict, and it can be a pretty aggressive conflict. It would be like somebody coming onto your land and just opening your house and going, I'm just going to take something out of the fridge because I'm hungry. How many of you think that's okay for somebody to just come into your house and help themselves to your refrigerator without an invitation? Anyone? Show of hands if somebody thinks it's okay. No, I see a couple of thumbs down. Yeah. And that's basically what we're doing, right? We're, the people that are going on illegally are essentially just walking into their house and taking stuff. So we're hoping to help them on that level as well. Now, where is everybody based? Can just one person tell me where all the classes are?
Yeah, absolutely. I can jump in and give you a little share. So we have some classrooms in Canada and the US today. We've got North Bay, Ontario, Thompson, Manitoba. We've got Connecticut, California, New Jersey, Johnson City, Tennessee, Mississauga, Ontario. So we've got a nice little spread of classrooms today.
Terrific. Well, each one of those classrooms, including you, the air we breathe, part of it comes from the Amazon. So I like everybody to think about, every time you're breathing, the air that you're breathing comes from somewhere. Well, half of the air you're breathing comes from plants above land. Half of the air you're breathing about comes from these little microscopic plants in the ocean. But if you think about the land plants, 20% of everything you breathe, that means every 5th breath. So if you take 5 breaths, the first or the last one, whichever, or somewhere in between, one of those is thanks to the Amazon. So the Amazon rainforest provides you up in Canada and the United States with oxygen. It's kind of a cool thing these plants do from very far away. And if you go one more step, there is no deforestation on Indigenous land. So where the Indigenous people actually have these territories demarcated for as their home, there's no deforestation. So by them simply being alive, we all get to breathe every 5th breath. It's kind of a cool and easy way to think about why do they matter to you wherever it is that you are on the planet. And that's why they actually provide us all with a service of oxygen. Do you guys want to see a couple of photographs? I need to see some hands, otherwise, because I can't hear anyone. Yep, I see hands. So I'll just show you a couple of pictures that I just have in hand here, and then I'll show you a couple of videos. I'll just do them in the order in which they come. So we had a phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal photographer come with us on our expeditions. We did 3 expeditions, 2 of them into the territory. And so we were lucky enough to be able to have a collection of really beautiful photographs. This one is of a Métis woman. We don't know how old she is. Most of the people, we won't know their age. The Métis of all the people are probably the ones that have been the most documented. So, you know, Discovery Channel or National Geographic or the BBC have gone in and they've filmed these people. And it's because of the way they dress. It's because of the way they tattoo and wear piercings. The thing is there's 5 different tribes, 5 different contacted groups of Indigenous people in this territory. There's one tribe that is in transition of contact. What that means is that they have lived in isolation in the jungle the way they always have, and they are now starting to have contact with people from the outside. So that's the 6th tribe. In this territory, there's also the largest number of uncontacted peoples. That means people living in complete isolation the way they always have. And that means that they are also very vulnerable. If you go in with a cold or a flu, half the population might die because they don't have the immune system against it. So they're still very much needing the protection that their land provides. So in telling the story of these tribes, what I wanted to do is actually document most of the different tribes. And so we went into the different villages across this land. This is a Kulina man named Adauto, who in the film turns out to be the hope for the film. He and his mother present a story of hope. The Kulina tribe was almost completely wiped out, partially because of intertribal warfare and also because their numbers were small to begin with. So he's really wanting to revive his people and have them come back and be healthy and really have a pride in their culture. This is a little girl from the Marubo tribe. Marubo. The Marubo tribe in the Javari territory actually have the greatest number of people. They are also very well organized. Part of that might be because they have been contacted. They have had contact with the outside world for, I believe it's almost 90 years now, so several generations, which means they have adapted to understanding the outsiders' system as well as their own. And because of their larger numbers, they're also able to unify in greater numbers and therefore fight off any kind of issues. Inside of their home, do you guys live like this? Does anyone live like this? Nope. So this is called a Maloca. The Maloca, this one particularly is the main house. Let me see, I have another picture I can show you just so, well, this is a bit dark, but you probably saw it if you saw the TED Talk. Maybe this will work better. Yeah, so the Maloca here is basically a very large structure at the center of the village where the chief lives with his sons. And the son's family will live there. So if the son has a wife and children, they will all live in the same house. But each family has a separate space of their own where they do their cooking and their sleeping. But then everything else is communal. So it's basically a dirt floor. It's a wooden and palm tree roof. It takes them about 2 months to build if the entire village comes together to build it. So this is a very important, essentially the center. This is where they meet. This is where they make all decisions. And yeah, it's kind of the nucleus or the heart of the entire village. Do you guys want to move into questions and then I can tell more stories? Because with all these many kids, it might be helpful now to, yes, I see 2 thumbs up from one classroom.
Absolutely, let's do it. So let's start meeting a few of our classrooms. So we're gonna go into our first room. Let's go to Mrs. DeMayo's class. They're hanging out with us in Kentucky at Salem Elementary School. Let's get their microphone on and see how they're doing. How we doing, boys and girls?
What could we do to help?
What can you do to help? Good and essential question. So I think one of the things that might seem simple but is very important is to start looking at the kind of stuff that your family buys. Deforestation doesn't happen just because of the illegal activities I described, but palm oil and soy and cattle ranching are 3 of the biggest exports from the Brazilian Amazon that cause deforestation. So just out of curiosity, ask your parents to pull everything out of the cupboards and go, which of these things have palm oil in them, right? And that might be one way to say, you know what, maybe we don't buy this anymore because it has palm oil and that cuts trees down. So that would be one way you guys can help. Another one I would say, looking at soy and cattle, if you can go that direction, is to start saying maybe you should cut back your consumption of imported beef. Again, this is a question you need to pose maybe to your parents or whoever is shopping in your home. Another way you can help is just on a global basis, because everything you do matters. If you start moving away from things that pollute the environment's going to be healthier. So moving away from single-use plastic would be a great one. We know there's a lot of information about that. So no more single-use straws or cups or any of that kind of stuff. And, use your refillable water bottle. Those would be another way. The great thing is Laura, who works with me to set all of this up, she'll be sending all of you a sheet at the end, and it'll have a list of things you can do besides what I just mentioned.
All right, perfect. And a great question to get us started from Mrs. DeMayo's class. Let's take a trip now. Let's go to California. Let's go to Vallejo. Let's check out some grade 3s hanging out with Mrs. Dam. Let's get their microphone turned on. How are we doing, grade 3s?
That's you. Oh. What is your favorite part about the Amazon?
Oh, wow. My favorite part about the Amazon. In terms of animals, in terms of people, in terms of stories?
The people.
People. So I think my favorite part, and this is going to sound maybe a bit strange of an answer, but I think my favorite part is that it's a very difficult place to work because people are complicated. And in a way, what this place has done for me is really made me push my limits. I have to be convinced that I can do this project. I need to work really hard to gain their trust. And I need to be very strong in making sure that I follow through with my promise. And the people don't always make it easy because they're very challenging, just like a lot of human beings around the world. But the satisfaction of knowing that I made a promise to them and that I'm following through far outweighs any of the complications. And then every now and then you have a moment where somebody says something to you and everything makes sense again. So, for example, this Adalto, whose photo I showed earlier, who said, my mother and I walk together knowing we can strengthen our people and strengthen our culture. And all of the negative stuff that you hear about the illegal activities just really rises up as hope. And if they continue to have hope for being able to protect themselves and protect their land, there's no reason why I should give up. So they actually give me a lot of energy in my day-to-day life, knowing they're out there fighting for their lives. So even when I'm tired, I have to stand back up and keep going.
All right. Great question. And, you know, it's so, I mean, it's great to hear about the work that you're doing and what you're doing, because over the years, those groups have been exploited so much, promises have been made. So it is so important to develop that trust and follow up and carry on these kind of projects. So awesome work.
Thank you.
All right, let's jump over. We're going to go north now to Thompson, Manitoba. Mrs. Oster has some grade 4s hanging out with us. Let's get that microphone turned on. How are we doing, grade 4s?
Yeah. May I ask you a question in French?
Yeah, bien sûr, vas-y.
Quels sont les langages que tu parles?
Alors, les 3 langages que je parle, c'est français, anglais, espagnol. Je comprends un petit peu le portugais au Brésil, mais je mélange mon espagnol et mon portugais.
Et comment est-ce que être trilingue a t'aidé dans ta vie?
Alors, être trilingue m'a aidé beaucoup parce que je peux parler entre des cultures différentes. And then I'll translate. Et parce que je peux voyager dans beaucoup de pays et avoir la facilité de discuter avec les gens un peu partout. So she asked me which languages I spoke, which is French, English, Spanish. And I said a little bit of Portuguese. I mix my Portuguese and my Spanish. And somehow it works out okay down there. And the second question was, how has it helped me around the world? And it's basically, you know, communicating. It's really important to be able to communicate with people, and languages is a start to that. But I want to add something to that. I don't think we can limit ourselves to thinking that spoken language is the only communication possible. In 2014, on one of our expeditions, I brought an artist with us, and his job was to sit and draw. And the reason I did that is because there's going to be a lot of people at Village who won't do interviews with us because they either didn't want to, or there's no time, or we already have plenty of people. But if he sits down and draws, there is a nonverbal communication that happens. And sure enough, every village we went to, he would sit down and draw, and all the kids would gather around, and they would watch him draw, and he would show them, and he would give them a pen, and then they would start drawing together. That to me is another form of communication. And it's universal. So don't underestimate that just because you can't speak the language, you can't communicate.
All right, awesome. We slid into bilingual territory. I had a feeling with that French immersion school that they might want to ask a question in French. So thanks so much to our class in Thompson, Manitoba for that great question. Let's take a little trip over to North Bay, Ontario this time. We are going to visit Mrs. Larmer's grade 5-6 split class and North Bay. Let's get their microphone turned on. How we doing, boys and girls?
Hi, my name is Peyton. I'm Indigenous, and what was the greatest gift that your grandfather ever gave to you?
The greatest gift he gave me was one I think my whole family gave me, was that I was never given limitations on what I was capable of. My grandfather was the person that all of you might recognize and know because of his name. But my grandmother was on expedition and on board Calypso more than anybody else. And my mother was an expedition photographer for 13 years. So she traveled every single year. She went on expedition for 3 months. So I think the greatest gift they all gave me is that there are no limitations to what you're capable of if you really set your mind to it, but that you can never do it alone. And I think it's really important. We see all these stories around the world, or you meet people, or even me sitting at the computer. I'm the person you're talking to about this project, but nobody does things by themselves. Even a person walking solo across Antarctica had a whole team of people getting that ready for them. And so, yeah, I think that's part of the greatest gift too. One is there's no limitations as long as you're willing to do the work to get to where you want to go. And two, don't forget that you need a team to get there.
All right, that is such an important message. It's, you know, so much. It happens so much when we're younger. We have these passions and we're excited about it, but life gets in the way sometimes, or we think too much about it and talk ourselves out of it. So it's really important to chase those passions, go after what's important to you, and take some chances, take some risks. Failure can be a good thing if you learn from it and try again. So really, really important points.
And we should talk about the failure. I mean, you know, we failed time and again on this project, and we had a lot of adversity and we had to stand back up and keep going. And I think you have to be worthy of your vision. If you have an idea of doing something, be willing to fall, because if you don't stand back up, maybe you didn't really mean it. And there's some things that aren't going to be possible, and maybe you have to let them go. And those are the hard lessons in life too. But I think that's why, going back to the first question, one of my favorite parts was also how difficult it was to work there.
All right, let's take a quick visit to another classroom now. Let's go to, actually, I want to give a quick shout out to one of our classrooms who's in the Hangout right now, but their microphone and camera isn't cooperating. So I'm going to give a shout out to Mrs. Henry's group, grade 4-5s hanging out in Mississauga, Ontario. Use that blue chat sidebar icon on the left and send us in a question or two, and I'll make sure.
Oh, there it is. That was quick.
Oh yeah, there we go, on command. Let's see. Why did you start traveling, and where is the first place you traveled to?
Wow. I started traveling with my family back and forth between France and the United States. My first sort of big expedition, if that's a little bit of the question, was to the Amazon when I was 9. Although it's not necessarily the first place I traveled to, it's what kind of stands out as more exotic than going to visit family, maybe. And then my favorite place to travel, that's a hard one. I don't know yet. I love going back to Chile. I have some good friends there. We did 12 documentaries for Chilean television. And so there's something that still remains absolutely beautiful and stunning. So I'd go back to Chile pretty easily. I can't say I enjoy going to the Amazon, but it's one of my favorite places because it's cause focused. But truthfully, I kind of like going home. And that's because I'm on the road a lot. There's a notion that the kind of life I lead is, you know, she's an explorer, it's romantic, she goes here, she goes there, but I'm away from my friends, I'm away from my family, I'm in uncomfortable conditions. We work from sun up to sundown. We have a purpose and a reason for being there. We're not on holiday. So it's stressful before you go. It's intense when you're there. It's lovely to come home, and all of it is incredibly satisfying because you've created something you believe in. So more than favorite place, I think it's just the act of contributing that I enjoy when I go somewhere.
All right, awesome question from our class in Mississauga. Let's see, we haven't visited Mrs. Martin's group yet. So they're in Princeton, New Jersey. Looks like some grade 5 students. Let's get that microphone turned on. How we doing, New Jersey?
Hi. Not too far from me.
Bonjour, comment ça va?
Ça va très bien.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Did you always want this job since childhood?
No, I didn't know I wanted to do this when I was younger. There was a point in time I wanted to be a veterinarian. Yeah, I so absolutely loved animals that I thought I wanted to take care of them when they were sick. And then I realized that I want to protect animals. I didn't start doing this kind of work until I was already doing my master's degree. And that was a little while ago already. So I definitely encourage young people to explore what it is that you love and what you're passionate about. And don't worry about, you're maybe too young for this, and nobody's going to college tomorrow, right? But when you graduate your schools, don't worry if you don't know exactly what you want to do. Just whatever you're going to do it with passion. Just mean it. Give everything you have to it. And again, going back to the idea of failure, if you realize it's not what you want to do, but you gave it everything you have, then you can walk away from it knowing that you tried. And then someday you'll find what you're passionate about. Or you're 10, 12, say 15 years old, and you're so clear about what you want to do, and you start doing that thing, and you realize that that's what you want to do. I think either way you follow your path, you just be genuine and authentic about it. Don't be swayed by what you see in the media that looks glamorous. I think just try what you're passionate about and see where it takes you.
Yeah, and I think just to add a little bit to that is I get to work with a lot of friends at National Geographic, and a lot of my friends, the careers they're doing now didn't exist before. They made some of those careers, and So that's exciting too. When you're passionate about something, sometimes you can make something work that's a little bit outside of the box. So that's pretty exciting. You don't always have to do the normal job.
And especially nowadays, I think there's just so much opportunity to create your own reality with technology, with innovation, and with, you know, just the access to basically all kinds of information online. There's really no excuse to not move forward.
All right. Well, I want to give a big shout out to Mr. Golahar's class. They're hanging out with us in Texas, and they sent us a question in via the live chat on YouTube. But I want to see, Mr. Golahar, if you want to turn on your microphone, you guys are more than welcome to ask the question right now, right live, if you want.
All right. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
So our question was, what role does writing and I forgot what I wrote. What role does writing and planning play in your research and exploration? Yeah,
so that's a good question. It's a lot. You know, before we end up going on expedition in the fields, there's a lot of research and logistics that goes into it. So it's a lot of hours of me sitting in this lovely chair, writing a whole lot of emails, looking at the budget, making plans, calling people. So a lot of planning goes into any expedition. We want to make sure that our team has, in our case, all of their vaccinations and that everything is okay. We need to get all the plane tickets. We need to have communication with the people down there that we're filming, making sure that they are available and they're aware that we're coming down. All the permits necessary for filming, so both on the government level as well as non-government level, if there are any entities that need to be consulted, such as the Indigenous organization representing the tribes. So that's months of preparation for a 3-week expedition. In terms of writing, there's a lot of different forms of filmmaking. I grew up for 10 years being part of and watching filmmaking happening in situ, which means we know the story that we want to shoot, but we don't actually write it before we get to the field. It tells itself when we're in the field. So there's a storyline or an outline, but we don't have necessarily the sequence of the film and the order in which it goes. And that's typically how I do it. Especially with people, I figure if I show up and I ask them questions, the story will be told to me through their voices. There's some people, however, to your question about writing, that will write a lot more before they go into the field to tell a story, and they will have a very clear idea based on their research how they want the story told and sometimes in what sequence. So they want to know what the beginning of the story is, the end of the story, and the middle. It's not typically how I've worked. It means for me that a lot of research in the front, but not a lot of writing. But when we get back from expedition and we have all of our footage and all of our content, we spend a lot more time in post-production taking out from, we had 100 hours of footage and we have a 78-minute film. So out of those 100 hours, we have to pull and make sense of what the story is and be able to weave it through for it to have a storyline you can follow. And then we write the entire script. So it just depends what kind of filmmaker you are and where you put your emphasis in terms of your writing.
All right. Well, Céline, we have a few minutes left, so I'm going to visit a couple more of our classrooms to steal some of their questions. So boys and girls, if you've got a burning question handy, give me a wave at the camera and that'll be my cue to come back. Of course, every classroom. All right. So let's visit as many as we can. Let's start with Mrs. Larmer's class in North Bay. Your microphone is on.
Hi, my name is Scarlett. What is your educational background?
So high school, I went to the United Nations International School in New York City. And I did a partial international baccalaureate program. When I graduated from there, I went to Skidmore College in upstate New York, and I studied psychology as a major and art as a minor. Years later, I went back to get my master's at the School for International Training, and I got a master's degree. It's a bit of a long title, but it's called International and Intercultural Management. I ended up working in the field of psychology for several years, working in psychiatric hospitals. So I did apply my degree, But that degree also helps me now in dealing with people across different cultures, different sectors of life. If I'm speaking to a fisherman or I'm speaking to the head of an oil company, I have to be able to adjust my way of being so that they will hear what I have to say and they'll hopefully answer the interview questions as honestly as possible. So the intercultural relations aspect of my master's degree and the psychology in my undergraduate degree ends up being really helpful in my work. But yeah, life took a couple of different turns along the way.
All right. Mrs. DeMile's class, do you guys have another question? I'll turn your microphone on.
What kind of stuff did you see in Easter Island?
What kind of what?
What kind of stones did you see in Easter Island?
Well, we saw all of the statues you're familiar with. If you think of Easter Island, you know, you see all of these like large statues and these large heads poking out. You can't really go anywhere in Easter Island and not see them. So while we were there, we weren't filming a story about that, but we were filming a story through the Film Fellowship, which is my nonprofit. We were filming a story about recovering culture and how a local man was wanting, he was a grandfather, and he says, I want our culture to stay alive through our people. So it was quite interesting to film him and hear his story with his grandchild and how he was doing that.
All right, so some of these classrooms definitely did a little bit of research before.
That's why I laughed. I was like, oh, you guys went a step further.
All right. I see lots of waving in Mrs. Martin's group in New Jersey, so let's go over there next.
Yes. Hello. Can I ask it in French?
Of course.
Pourquoi, comment et quand as-tu décidé d'être une exploratrice?
So the question for the English speakers is when, why, and how did I decide to be an explorer? Je pense pas que j'ai décidé comme ça d'un jour à l'autre. Je me suis pas levée un matin et à me dire ah ben ça y est, aujourd'hui je vais être exploratrice. So I didn't decide from one day to another that I wanted to be an explorer. I didn't just, you know, wake up one morning and say, oh, this is what I'm doing today. But it came bit by bit. So first I was living in Costa Rica. And I was working on my master's thesis, and I had a full-time job working on a sustainable development project down there. And my father was shooting documentaries for PBS on a series called Ocean Adventures. And I said, you know, I do logistics because I was guiding biking and hiking trips. Production is a lot of logistics and planning and research. And I said, if you ever need my help in planning any of the expeditions, let me know. And so he called me on one of the shoots, which was the gray whale migration from Baja California up to Barrow, Alaska, and asked for my help in planning some of the logistics for the northern region. And I got sucked into the world of documentary filmmaking very quickly in realizing that I'm comfortable traveling. I'm comfortable being in different locations, adapting to the Arctic cold or the heat of the Amazon or diving in Antarctica. And but it's not enough for me to go there and just do it for the fun of doing it or for the exploration. What's most important to me is bringing back stories and bringing back ideas of how we're all interconnected. So if anybody wakes up one morning and just has this aha moment of what you want to do for the rest of your life, I think it's pretty unique. I think a lot of people, it's more of a longer process of your studies coming together with the people that you meet and experiences you have in the world.
All right, sliding back to California, Mrs. Dam's class, do you have a follow-up?
Céline, how many acres of trees and land are cut down in a year?
Oh, wow. I don't have the answer to that question, actually. I could do a quick Google search, but I don't have that answer for you. I think that it's in the Amazon, it was something measured along the lines of American football fields. What I do know goes back to what I said earlier is that on indigenous land, in the Brazilian Amazon, there's no deforestation. So if you want to continue helping this cause, I would say help the organizations that are helping protect that land. Yep.
And a little homework, if you want to check it out on Google and then check out other places around the world, like the Congo in Africa, Borneo, other places in Indonesia, and see how the rates compare. And it's a little bit scary when you start looking at some of the statistics. So we really do need to start thinking a bit more about our planet's future. Let's see, Mrs. Oster, Manitoba, your microphone's on.
What is the populations of the tribes?
So the in the Shivari territory, we've got that they know of, because the numbers are always a bit unknown. They don't do a census on a regular basis. There is about 5,000 people in the Indigenous peoples group of contacted tribes, right? So again, going back to what I said earlier, is you have those who are contacted and those who live in isolation. So there's about 5,000 in the Indigenous peoples that are contacted, and they think somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 in the groups that are in isolation or uncontacted. And the way they know that is that they do overflights with small Cessna planes. They see where their Malocas are. You guys remember the Maloca, the main house of the village? So they see the size of the Maloca, and they can basically estimate how many people are in that little village according to the size of the Maloca. So the numbers are anywhere from 6,500 to 7,000 plus. And this is an area, it's 85,000 square kilometers. It's the size of Portugal, or the state of Maine almost.
All right, Mr. Galahar, do you guys want to give me a wave if we should visit your class one more time before we wrap up? I do see some waving. Let's do it.
All right. So our question is there a lesson or anything like a particular lesson that you've taken away from working with the Indigenous tribes that you apply to your daily life? Like, kind of, I know that we were kind of obsessed with technology and the use of screen time and devices and all of that. But is there anything that you've taken away from the Indigenous tribes that could make us kind of step back from that?
Yeah, there's a few. Am I allowed more than one?
Oh, as many as you like.
One of the ones that immediately came to mind as you're asking the question was this notion of dialogue and communication and listening. We do a lot of talking. And if you just stop for a moment and truly listen to other people, and I don't mean students have to listen just to the adults. I mean, listen to each other, right? Listen to what your friends are actually saying. And what does it mean? And I think then you'll learn a lot more about yourself that way. It's a test in patience to sit down for very, very long hours and just listen to what's happening. There's a great exercise actually with a talking stick that I would recommend be implemented in some of the classrooms is, sit around in a circle and have the talking stick. And while somebody's speaking, the only thing you're doing is listening to that person, actively listening. I had to develop a lot of patience doing this project because I want to come down. I have a limited amount of time. We're filming. I just need to get my images and my stories. I need to go. They want to sit down with you. And sometimes you sit there for 4 hours and my camera does not get picked up. And I need to sit and listen because they have something important to say. And it's an opportunity for them to share a message. So that was a big learning for me, is to be an active listener and to get better at taking a step back, relaxing into the conversation instead of always being in a hurry. I'm on my desktop. I have 2 phones and I have a laptop that I travel with. It's the world we live in today doesn't allow us to slow down. So I would say slow down and listen a bit more. The second one I learned in a very hard lesson, and I won't tell the whole story. Ask the person you are talking to what they need. Don't assume you know. I made the assumption at one point with a different group of people that I knew what they needed, and I was completely wrong. And I had to take a step back when he said, you are no different than anyone else. You come here and you take stories, but what are you doing for us? And I said, you're right. I am taking stories and I'm leaving. So what do you need from me? And he answered me. He said, we need camcorders. We're trying to film all of the oil destruction in our territory. This is in Peru. I would have never guessed that's what they needed. But it took me that moment in a hard lesson of being told that I take and I don't give, to say, how can I give? And he gave me a very simple answer and something that I was able to do. So active listening, and just talk to the person in front of you and see what it is that they need. Ask them.
All right, really important lessons. So Céline, just to wrap up with a final question, I think this is a good one to end on. This came in from our class in Mississauga. They sent it to me via the chat, and they're wondering, what have you learned from the Indigenous tribes in the Amazon you've worked with that could help other Indigenous people in other areas of the world?
Well, I would say one of, and this is a struggle that they're going through now, is that unification is a strength. You know, the old warfare kind of tales of divide and conquer are true. These different groups have their own warring history. They have killed each other, they have stolen from each other, they've pushed people away for land, but they are now in a position where they have to unite to defend their common future and their common survival. So I would say unification, despite disagreements or despite history, is the best way to combat a common threat. And I would say that beyond this just being about Indigenous people anywhere on the planet, it's about us as human beings. We are collectively facing this common threat that is climate change. If we don't come together and unify and realize that it's our common future, then what are we moving towards? We're moving towards, oh, but I want more. So if I agree with this, I can't have my big house, my big car, my big whatever. Yeah, but we're all living on the same planet. So the unification in the face of adversity, I think is a strong message I can share with Indigenous peoples anywhere, but more so with the human tribe.
Well, Céline, it was so great to steal a little bit of your time today. It was such a pleasure. Very excited to see the film when it is completed. And it sounds like you're gonna have a blast on your road trip, driving around the country and sharing the film with everybody. So again, thanks so much for the work you're doing. Thanks for taking the time for that education piece and sharing with the students. And it was tons of fun hanging out today.
Well, it certainly is my pleasure. The more I do this, the more I want to keep talking to kids. I love the questions, and I think it's so valuable. And I want to say that it's not just about me giving, I'm receiving. I feel just the good energy from students. You guys are, you're smart and you're on your way to hopefully a beautiful world. So thank you for just being here.
All right, well, let's turn all the microphones on, boys and girls. If you want to get a little bit loud, say a big goodbye and thank you to Céline. All right. You guys, you never let me down with that. Always excited for a good goodbye. So Céline, again, thank you so much. We look forward to a future connection, and good luck with everything coming up.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.